In this video, we're going to be putting every ride at Hollywood Studios on a tier list, from S as the best to F as the worst. Let's start with the first attraction you'll see when entering the park, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. This trackless dark ride was the replacement for the Great Movie Ride, which has proven to be a controversial decision. Even so, I really enjoy this ride. It feels like a cartoon brought to life, with bright animated colors all around you. The way the environments change is such a cool effect, and one I honestly wish they used more. Still, I think this dark ride is pretty solid, especially with its use of trackless ride vehicles. The queue is fairly mediocre, and the ride itself could be more advanced, but even so, I think this ride is at least worthy of the A tier. Now, let's turn left and head towards the Star Wars ride that everyone talks about at this park, Star Tours. While Star Tours may be a bit outdated compared to the attractions at Galaxy's Edge, I still feel like it has a ton of charm that makes it worth a ride. While Galaxy's Edge takes a more serious tone, Star Tours feels a lot more goofy. C-3PO is your guide through the stars on a tour gone wrong, where you'll fly through space battles, weave through dense forests, or soar alongside space whales. All of these scenarios are randomized, so you'll never know what exactly you might do. That makes this ride incredibly re-rideable, as there's a ton of different scenarios to experience. I will admit this ride is just a basic simulator, but I do think it's one of the better ones out there. It's not quite up there with the best at this park, but I'd probably land it around the B tier. Next, let's talk about an attraction I have a bit of a bias for. I love the Muppets, and Muppet Vision 3D might be one of my favorite attractions at Walt Disney World. Despite it being just a screen-based show, there's so much happening outside the screen that makes the entire thing feel so special. There's projection mapping, smoke effects, animatronics all around you, and even a full-size Sweetums puppet that comes out near the end. The show itself is really funny too, along with the pre-show you watch beforehand. As a screen-based show, it's the absolute best that's ever been made. As a ride though, I can admit this isn't quite in the S tier. However, this is undoubtedly at least in the A tier for me. It's a ride I always have to do when stopping by Hollywood Studios, and one that will remain a favorite for years to come. Now, let's head right into Galaxy's Edge, where one of the most exciting attractions at this park sits. Star Wars Rise of the Resistance is one of the most advanced dark rides ever created, and one that still holds up to this day. From the animatronics, to the projection mapping, to the use of trackless ride vehicles, the amount of stuff going on in this ride is impressive to say the least. That does mean there's a lot that can go wrong, but I think it was worth it just to see a ride as innovative as this. The pre-shows alone are insane, essentially putting you in an entirely different ride system. There are a few more flaws, like most of the queue being pretty boring, but despite that, there's no denying that this is one of the best dark rides ever created. Even with its technical hiccups, I do believe this is the first ride here worthy of an S tier. Unfortunately, the other ride at Galaxy's Edge doesn't quite do it for me. While Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run is far more advanced than Star Tours, I feel like the scenario doesn't work quite as well for me. It just feels a bit lifeless, with no recognizable Star Wars elements apart from the ship you're flying. I can respect trying to make something that doesn't necessarily rely on IP, but in comparison, it feels like Star Tours takes full advantage of the franchise it's based on. The other downside with this ride are the roles you get. The pilot role is actually really cool, taking control of the Millennium Falcon as it attempts this mission. The other two roles though are extremely dull, with the gunner and engineer basically just hitting buttons on the ride. If there were more scenarios to experience, I'd be more tempted to stop by this attraction often. However, in its current state, I rarely take a ride on Smuggler's Run. It's well themed and can be fun in the pilot seat, but considering the whole experience, I think I'd have to put this one in the C tier. Now, let's head out of Galaxy's Edge and shrink down to the size of a toy for Toy Story Land. The first ride we'll quickly discuss here is Alien Swirling Saucers, a basic spinning flat ride themed to space. As you'd expect, this ride is nothing special, although it is a bit more unique than the usual Dumbo clone. It's nice for Hollywood Studios to have something a bit smaller in the park too, even if it's nothing amazing. Based on all that, I think I'll put this in the D tier, since it's nowhere near an awful ride or anything. Luckily, there's some bigger attractions at Toy Story Land as well. Slinky Dog Dash is a family roller coaster that takes up a majority of this area, and I have some mixed feelings on it. The thrill level of this attraction is pretty low, which is fair enough considering it's meant for a family audience. However, despite that, I feel like there's so many other Disney coasters that are either more thrilling or better themed. The theming here isn't bad, but I wouldn't call it amazing either. Pair that with the long waits this ride tends to get, and this is usually a skip for me. I'd say that puts it in the C tier, although it is leaning towards a D. Let's finish up Toy Story Land by talking about its star attraction. Toy Story Mania is one of my favorite shooting dark rides in the world. On its surface, it does look fairly basic, with pretty mediocre theming and screens throughout the ride. However, the gameplay itself is so entertaining and addictive, changing from location to location throughout the ride. While in concept it may be fairly simple, I feel like there's a lot of things that go into making this ride what it is. It's not quite worthy of the S tier, but it's certainly a solid A tier at the very least. Now, let's head down to Sunset Boulevard to talk about the final 3 attractions. Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy is a show that's easy to forget is even here. The animatronic is neat, but there's not a whole lot else going on to make this show worth watching. Especially compared to the close-by Muppet Vision 3D, this show is incredibly lackluster. There's so many better shows to visit in this park alone, which places this one in the F tier for me. The last 2 rides we'll be discussing are among the most thrilling at Walt Disney World. First, you have Rockin' Roller Coaster, the only inverting roller coaster at the resort. Because of those inversions and the intense launch at the start, this ride is incredibly intense. That intensity makes the ride extremely fun for someone like me, but the theming is admittedly a bit lackluster. While I appreciate that it's different compared to the standard space theming you see on a lot of indoor Disney coasters, it isn't quite up there with some of their best. The queue especially doesn't have a lot going on, although I guess it works for what the ride is going for. Despite the theming, or lack thereof, I still think this one deserves the B tier. It's a really fun ride, but not quite one of my favorites at the park. Now, let's finish this off with my favorite ride in the entire resort, Tower of Terror. I'm usually against the idea of drop towers considering my fear of heights, but this ride is the exception. Tower of Terror is the perfect mixture of theming and thrill, with the spooky hotel blending perfectly with the intensity of the ride. The drops are just insane, and the randomization of those drops means the ride is different each time you ride it. There's so much that goes into making this ride what it is, from the iconic pre-show to the trippy dark ride segment. I love Tower of Terror, and it stands as my favorite attraction in Hollywood Studios, placing it in the S tier. Now, with all that said, here's the final tier list. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of my Walt Disney World tier list, and check out the last episode all about Animal Kingdom. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.